It certainly isn't helpful to say to America's Five Eyes partners that you can't share military intelligence when you are busy trying to defend the territorial integrity of a friend and ally like Ukraine against an illegal Russian invasion. So it certainly doesn't help, and it begins, it doesn't begin, it continues the process of, if you like, tilting the table in the direction of the Kremlin in advance of the negotiations.
We really are looking at what happened after last night's big speech to Congress, because it seemed at that point that Donald Trump's heart was maybe warming a bit towards Volodymyr Zelensky after his offer to come to the negotiating table and seek a peace agreement under, his words, the strong leadership of the American president. But today's announcement that the US is suspending its intelligence sharing with Ukraine on top of having paused its military assistance brought fresh concern. Now, we learned this evening that the French President Emmanuel Macron plans to hold a meeting of European army chiefs in Paris next week, as he warns that Europe is in a new era and needs to increase defence spending.
To remain a spectator in this dangerous world would be crazy. We need, without any further ado, to take steps to guarantee the security of France, Europe and Ukraine first. All of the initiatives for peace are going in the right direction, and I welcome them. And we need to continue to help Ukrainians resist.
Well, yes, the lack of intelligence could be a huge blow to Ukraine's ability to fight the Russian forces and defend themselves from incoming missiles. However, the US National Security Advisor Mike Waltz insists that the US is still leading the charge when it comes to peace talks.
We are talking about a location, a date, a negotiating team. Yesterday and today was a positive step forward to say we are going to negotiate this peace, and we're already talking about confidence-building measures that we'll then take to the Russians and test that side.
The UK has also reportedly been blocked from sharing any intelligence that they get provided by the US, sharing it with the Ukrainian allies. Quite a few developments to talk about with Sir Peter Westmacott, who is a former UK ambassador to France and to the US. He took part in a special session in the House of Lords today involving fellow former US ambassadors discussing the so-called special relationship. Sir Peter Westmacott, thank you for joining us on Times Radio this morning. So much to chew over with you. I did hear you acknowledging today that Europe, of course, will have to do more about our own security in future. That point reinforced by President Macron today. But do you think the United States has just gone too far today in suspending intelligence sharing with Ukraine on top of that decision to pause military assistance?
Well, good evening. It's good to be with you. I'm not sure that I can judge whether the United States has gone too far in doing this. I think many people in Europe, the United Kingdom in particular, have been concerned that the United States has gone too far towards giving the Russians what they would like in advance of any substantive negotiations about the kind of ceasefire and the kind of security guarantees that Ukraine will receive if there is to be a pause, or hopefully a definitive end, to the fighting. So we've had a number of surprises. The arms suspension, I'm told, took most of America's allies by surprise, even though Keir Starmer's had a number of phone calls with Donald Trump and has played, I think, an extraordinarily important role in trying to calm down tensions. And number 10 seemed to have given good advice also to Volodymyr Zelensky about how to handle Washington. This latest thing, the suspension of intelligence, I don't know where it came from. How widely authorized is it? You never quite know. Somebody might have put something out there and then they might change their mind later. It isn't helpful, and it certainly isn't helpful to say to America's Five Eyes partners that you can't share military intelligence when you are busy trying to defend the territorial integrity of a friend and ally like Ukraine against an illegal Russian invasion. So it certainly doesn't help, and it begins, it doesn't begin, it continues the process of, if you like, tilting the table in the direction of the Kremlin in advance of the negotiations. So I think it is a worrying development, but I think it takes a bit longer to work out how significant it really is. and how useful if you like, the breaking of the ice has been as a result of the message which Zelensky sent to President Trump, which produced a very positive, a fairly positive reaction from President Trump in his State of the Union speech last night. If that
Well, it did, didn't it? But he then went on today to make this other announcement.
Yeah, but he's also talking about coming to terms and reaching an agreement. So, this is not a helpful development, but the rest of it still seems to be, as far as I can tell anyway, on the table. So let's see where that goes. There was talk earlier today that Macron and Starmer and Zelensky were all going to go to Washington together. I think that story seems to have gone away, but they all do remain in close contact. And I do think that the gesture that Zelensky has made to try to calm things down after the bust-up in the Oval Office seems to have improved the atmosphere.
Yes, you'd wonder what more he needs to do, though, and whether Donald Trump will now be requiring even more from him before he will agree to give the security assurances that Ukraine and indeed the allies in France and UK and beyond are calling for. I was very struck by the fact that a group of former ambassadors, including yourself, were sitting talking quite openly about concerns about intelligence and concerns about Trump appointees. This is the word from Sir David Manning, one of your former former ambassador colleagues. He said comments from Trump appointees who have denigrated NATO allies and appear to be seeking ways of appeasing Russia show that you have a problem on the intelligence front because these are not values that we have. I found that quite extraordinary. I never thought I'd hear ambassadors talking like that about our hitherto ally, the special relationship.
Well, I think we are in a different space now. We are dealing with an American government which, in this particular issue, has visibly taken the side of the Russians rather than those of Ukraine, which we've all been allied until now in defending against the consequences of the Russian invasion. We've also, as David was saying earlier, but I think we all agree with this, we've seen some pretty strange appointments into key intelligence positions, the head of the FBI, the director of national intelligence, less so the CIA. I think people are less worried about that, and the defense secretary, who was in Munich making some pretty extraordinary remarks about America's erstwhile allies. We are in a different place, and never mind the mood music, the really worrying thing is that, first of all, that America appears to be less interested in playing a part in securing the defense of Europe against whatever malevolent actors and threats there might be, and secondly, tilting the negotiation on the future of Ukraine in the direction of the Kremlin. So these are significant developments, and we are, I think, rightly concerned that we're in a different space with a very different kind of American government.
So do you think then that the UK might want to be a bit more circumspect, shall we say, about what it shares with America when it comes to intelligence in case it goes on to inform Russia?
I think there's some concern about that, and there was before when Trump was president previously, that some of the people who he'd got in intelligence positions might not have been, absolutely watertight in terms of the confidentiality with which they approach this stuff. That said, I would caution that even in the past, when we've been working with a US administration which was absolutely, with us and in principles and values and trust and enemies and so on, common enemies, common friends, there were sometimes leaks of intelligence which were embarrassing and annoying because people just, talk too openly sometimes to journalists. Now, I think there are ways in which you can manage the shared intelligence. There are ways in which you can do source protection. There are ways in which you can ensure that the key person, in other words, the President of the United States and his Secretary of State and one or two other national security advisors and so on, are aware of what the intelligence says without sharing with them the detail of how and where it's come from in a manner that, that could be dangerous. You can manage that. You can work around it. So as long as people are aware of the danger, I don't think that this needs to stop the spread of information and intelligence, and bear in mind that within the Five Eyes arrangement, the United States is a very significant contributor. So it would be very serious indeed if the flow of intel between the close allies was for some reason to dry up.
Well, it would be incredibly significant if that were to happen. I wonder, Sir Peter, what advice you'd offer to the current ambassador, Lord Mandelson, about how to handle all of this. We've got the front page of the Times. I've just got it in front of me now. And the headline is, "More people will die after US cuts." Quotes a Ukraine MP saying that the brutal decision to pull American intelligence sharing after denying the country military aid means so many people will be doomed. And she insists that the move won't change Ukraine's resolve to fight on, but it's obviously brutal. And I cannot imagine how many people will pay the ultimate price for the decision. What does Peter Mandelson do with that sort of information? Does he pass it on to Donald Trump? How does he handle the Trump administration now, in your view?
Well, I think the first thing I'd say is that's an absolutely understandable reaction from people in Ukraine. Does it mean that all intelligence, including battlefield information about the disposition of Russian tanks and offensive equipment, is being withheld, or does it mean simply that certain other forms of intelligence are going to be held back? I don't know the answer. So before we reach too many dramatic conclusions, I do think we need to know more, and the Ukrainians need to know more. Maybe it's worse than I fear. I don't yet know how significant it is. But the first thing is, let's be clear what this means. Sometimes these statements do not mean that everything is going to be different. It just means that some things will be different than they have been before. And that's the first, if you like, qualification I would make. Second thing is, I don't think Peter Mandelson needs much advice from me about how to manage these things.
I'm sure he'd appreciate it.
He's been on radio and television saying what he thinks about the way that Zelensky should behave and the way that the United States should manage this. I think that it is important, not just for him, but for the British government, on the back of the extensive contacts that the Prime Minister has been having with President Trump and that Marco Rubio is having with David Lammy and so on, to make very clear that this kind of thing, this kind of decision is deeply unhelpful. And not only is it unhelpful to the cause of Ukraine, which at least until now we've all been agreed is what we're supporting, but doing something like that simply tilts the playing field in the direction of the Russians in a way that risks there being an unbalanced or a wrong ceasefire, even if there is agreement on one. And by the way, it is by no means certain that Vladimir Putin is ready to settle for a ceasefire. We all kind of assume that he will be if Zelensky agrees to one, but it's not in the bag. It tilts the thing in the direction of the Kremlin in a way which is not necessarily good for President Trump's administration. If he is seen to be an architect of a terrible deal, which simply hands a chunk of a sovereign country, which has been invaded by Russia, to the Kremlin, I'm not sure that's great for the credibility, if you like, of the new United States government. So there's a number of things that, whether it's Peter or whether it's other members of the UK government and other friends and allies of America, can and should be saying to them about, be very careful whether this is really in the United States' interest. We know it's not in Ukraine's interest, but that doesn't necessarily cut a lot of mustard. What we've really got to do is to make people see this through the perspective of what's good for America. And this sounds to me, but I qualify it by saying I don't know all the details yet, as though it's not good for America and that it does not contribute towards the production of a reasonable ceasefire, which in any case would need to be underpinned by security guarantees, to which the United States of America, I think, needs to be a contributor. And I know that the British government hasn't given up on that cause, despite the fact that President Trump has said in the past that he didn't want to be a part of that. But his attitude towards Ukraine may be softening, despite what you've correctly said is an alarming development, which is the announcement of the suspension of intelligence cooperation. So lots still to look at, lots still to analyse,
yes,
lots
indeed.
still to
Lots more to analyse, and diplomacy hopefully still rules when it comes to it in the end. Sir Peter Westmacott, thank you very much for talking to us this evening. As I mentioned with Sir Peter there, the front page of the Times has focused on that story with the warning from a Ukrainian MP that more people will die after the US cuts. Ukraine's key weapons systems were dramatically weakened yesterday after the US severed its intelligence sharing with Kyiv, leading to those warnings that the move will result in more civilians dying. The weapons systems stop receiving data they rely upon to hit Russian targets, hampering Ukraine's ability to effectively defend itself against incoming attacks. Well, you heard Peter Westmacott's response to that, and there's a lot of watching and waiting for the moment.